It's been a good long while since I did a countdown list. Ever since I did the worst villains list, I've prepared myself for the best villains list, and for the Halloween special. Since I don't really have any plans for Halloween, I think this would be the next best thing. Anyway, I figured I would be prepared to do this list, since I had it saved for quite a while, and after playing through various games and such, I managed to find 10 villains that I consider to be the best, whether it's in terms of their design, personality, backstory, role throughout the entire game, their boss fight, and anything else I can add as a bonus. I prepared myself all the way through, and I picked out the 10 that I consider to be the best. These are the ones, in my opinion, that I think deserve some praise. If you have anyone else that you think deserves some praise, feel free to share out. But with that being said, here are the 10 antagonists that I consider to be the best. Honestly, when it comes to the Mass Effect trilogy, I was heavily disappointed with how they handled their villains in later games. And it's ridiculous that only the first game has an actual good antagonist, Sarin Urus. He's one of the only good villains in the entire trilogy, considering the others weren't really that interesting to begin with. What's the deal with Sarin? Well, for one thing, throughout the entirety of the game, he actually does stuff to prevent anyone from knowing or exposing out his whole operation. On Eden Prime, he kills Nihilus and interacts with the Promethean beacon to find the conduit. So that will be important later on. He tries to prevent Anderson and Shepard from exposing out what he did on Eden Prime, but it did get exposed out, despite the fact the Council did absolutely nothing to prevent it, but here we go. Anyways, throughout the entirety of the game, you learn about why Sarin is doing this, why he's searching for the conduit, and it was all thanks to Sovereign, a Vanguard Reaper-class ship that indoctrinated him and told him lies about the Reapers. Considering he's a Reaper himself, Sovereign's main plan is to unleash the Age of Extinction, and by bringing out all of his kind into the galaxy. They're the big reason why the Protheans went extinct for 50,000 years, and then they went away so they can continue the life cycle over and over again. And because Sarin believes that he will be spared, and anyone will be spared if they side with the Reapers, only for him to just be a puppet in Sovereign's plan. Because he wants to find the conduit from the Citadel in order to begin the Age of Extinction. But in the end, Sarin needs to know this, and if you try to convince him of this on the planet Vermeer, and in the final confrontation, you can make my man shoot himself because of what he did. Now that's unexpected. Through your convincing, you're able to try to show him the ways, but he still has doubts. He believes that what you're telling is a lie, but at the same time, could be the truth. And even with this, he had Sovereign implanted him with this indoctrination just to clear his mind of these doubts. But in the end, he knows deep down that it's all a lie if you try to convince him that. However, the only reason why he ain't higher on the list is because the lack of screen time, but his presence is heavily known in the most important parts of the game, like on Vermeer and the final encounter. His boss fights are pretty solid, even if they're a bit easier depending on which version you're playing. The final fight against him when he's deformed by Sovereign is actually a pretty solid final boss fight, and the better ones to end the first game. The villains themselves definitely do a good job with their screen time and presence in the game, despite the lack of it throughout most of it, but I still give him credit for at least giving us an actual good villain. Now, if only the later games actually tried. If there's one series I didn't think I would be adding into my list, it would have been the Drawn to Life series. Considering these two games have a pretty good selection of characters, I wasn't expecting myself to liking the main villain, Wilfrey, serving as the main antagonist for both the Drawn to Life games. He plays a big role in the series, especially in the sequel. What can I really say about him? Well, first off, his backstory is quite interesting. He once was known as the most respected and popular Raposa in Raposa Village, and he thought to himself one day, why can the creator only draw in the Book of Life, the one thing that brings this world together? And thinking one day that he could do better, he broke into Creation Hall, stole the book, and started drawing, only for all of it to become dark and twisted monsters. Enraged by this failure, he tore off all the pages and thus became one with the darkness himself. So, yeah, I think we all know how that turned out. He plays a big role in the first game and was responsible for most of the bosses trying to stop the hero. And to make absolute sure that he wants to stop you, he goes out of his way to killing the mayor and stealing the Book of Life for himself, and thus undoing everything you have worked throughout the entire game. Wow, he really took matters into his own hands. Sure, it's only at the near end of the game, but I still appreciate the effort he put into. And after the final boss fight at the end of the first game, you'd think that would be the end of him, but he shows up in the sequel. Somehow, now with this new profound power of the scepter, he manages to erase all color across the world and scatter all the villagers to different islands, and going as far as manipulating other people for his own gain. Through the power of manipulation, he exploited out the various leaders' egos and their fears, getting the best of them with these disguises, and even convincing Marie to join his side, and showing her the truth of the creator and what he plans to do.
Okay, are you willing to trust the one guy that killed your father?
I'm starting to wonder where your priorities lie, huh? But even with that, everyone still puts their faith into the creator and want to stop Wilfrey. And even at one moment in the game where he's disguised himself as a character named Sock, he throws the Book of Life into the ocean and was played as like a fiddle. I was not expecting that. The game manages to find his island, which turns out to be a deformed island of all the various villages we visit, and with his mansion in the back of it. And because he knows about the creator and what he plans to do, he wants to stop the creator from erasing this whole entire world completely. And Wilfrey is willing to go out of his way to make sure of it. So as far as taunting us and making sure that everyone doesn't believe in us because of what he did throughout the entire game. But no matter what, everyone still believes in the creator, and thus giving us hope to fight him in the final boss fight. Now, the only downside with him is his boss fights, serving as the final boss in both the Drawn to Life games. In the first game, the fight is only slightly challenging because of the scorpion, but aside from Wilfrey himself, it's barely anything exciting. As for the second game, you are put into a forced loss fight, and then you can actually fight him, but it's really underwhelming. His attacks are all too easy to avoid, and even by DS standards, it's way too easy for a final boss. It doesn't make the fight terrible, but I just wish they could have done a bit more. But I do like the way Wilfrey goes about throughout the entire game, actually taking matters into his own hands. He's basically the series equivalent to Satan himself, which is funny considering that the developers actually clarified that was their intention. Huh, the more you know. And overall, I consider him to be one of the better known villains that I have seen thus far. Honestly, when it comes to female antagonists, not a lot of them are really heavily known, but there are a couple of good ones I have seen that actually do their jobs well. And this one might come as a bit of a surprise, but honestly, I quite like Apollyon from For Honor. Considering I played through the entirety of the game, I actually really like the way they went about with the story and everything along the way. Sure, this may be an odd pick, but honestly, she's one of the more underrated antagonists that I've seen. Her design is quite intimidating and quite cool looking. I never thought I would see that. And her big role into the game is that she's the leader of the Blackstone Legion. They have come to rule Ashfield, and she admires the warriors of all three factions of their fighting spirit, but is disgusted about the fact that they are trying to favor peace. So what does she do? She goes out of her way to try to cause them all to fight each other, even their own factions against each other, to usher in a new age of war, the Age of Wolves, hoping that this would be the true potential for humanity. And what resulted in is chaos and destruction happening between the knights, the Vikings, and the samurai, believing that this is the best way they should go about things. Peace? Pfft, who even needs that? That's for the weak. She manages to pull out "the strong will survive, the weak shall die." And honestly, it's quite an interesting take for a character, especially something in a game like this. She embodies the philosophy of war as a necessary force for evolution and aims to demonstrate that this is how humanity is going to rise above. This is how they are going to confront their own limits, how they are going to reach their goal in this entire game. And even upon her death, she still succeeds in this goal, as the war still continued on for 7 years throughout the entire game. And honestly, it's very rare to see a villain actually succeed in their goals, and this is one of those few instances. I do appreciate how she plays a huge role throughout the entirety of the game, especially with all the other factions getting a chance to shine in, despite being the final boss in the samurai story. And speaking of that, the fight is quite challenging, and one of the better final bosses I have faced. It's quite tough to go through all three of the phases and getting used to the attack patterns, but overall I say she does a solid job ending the game overall. So I want to give credit to what the narrative was going for and how she presented herself throughout the entire game. And one of the few instances in female antagonists actually, is good, at least. Honestly, when it comes to the Cloa series, they managed to do a very good job with their villains. Well, most of the time. From the console games, their villains are quite interesting in terms of their design and personality, role throughout the entire game, and just making them some of the big highlights. And the biggest highlight of them all is Leona from the sequel. And surprisingly, she does a very good job serving as the main antagonist of the game up until the near end. Her design is quite cool. A sky pirate does look very fitting for her, and her backstory does get explained the more you progress into the game. She once was a priestess in training, and due to her being so impatient with all this training, she decided to go out of her own way to find the power and use it for her own gain. Just really impatient does bite you, huh? But it does. Serving as the main villain, she tries to retrieve all the various element powers to reawaken the Fifth Kingdom, the Kingdom of Sorrow, and using a fake ring that she created that Konoha is holding in hopes to actually find it. And even putting others at risk, like destroying an entire city and sending all the various monsters to fight Konoha, so that way she can get all the data she needs about the ring and how to use it. But after our heroes managed to gather all four of the elements, she used the disguise to steal the freaking element and reveal the Fifth Kingdom, thus so she can use that power as well. But karma completely bite her in the back, and thus lead to her being corrupted into this cursed form. and thus giving us one of the best penultimate bosses I've faced. It is quite challenging, and you have to use the various enemies in order to make your way to damaging her. Throughout all 2 phases, it's quite a hectic and fun fight, and even the music definitely solidifies the feeling. And after the fight, she reverts back to her normal form and realized that she was consumed by all this power, this fake facade she tried to put on herself. And while the power consumed her, it really harmed her in a certain way. So she tries to go through a redemption arc by helping you during the final boss fight and rebuilding the 5th kingdom. And thus, it comes to a nice conclusion. She actually does stuff throughout the entire game, serves a huge role, a backstory that was quite interesting, and a very good boss fight. She's one of the few villains that I actually appreciate from this series, along with Joker and Guardius. This is really surprising to see from this series, and I'm so happy that I played through it just to experience what the villains have to offer. Honestly, when it comes to sadistic villains, they're one of the few that I actually like because they actually get the job done, are complete scumbags, and just want to see the world burn for their own gain. One of those few being the main villain from the first Neo game, Edward Kelly. An odd name, I will say, but Kelly himself actually plays a huge role in the first Neo game. You meet him at the start of the game, and after being the first boss, he takes William's spirit in search for the Kingdom of Gold. He was sent by John Dee in search for more Amrita and for the war efforts on Japan. But later on in the game, you'll see just how much more of a sadistic bastard he is, because he was just only here for the Amrita, but after hearing about the Kyoto, now he's more interested in seeing destruction upon the country. And what's the best way he can do it? Forcing samurais to kill each other and taking part into a war conflict that he shouldn't be involved in, just so he can watch everything burn and cause chaos and destruction along the way. Even going as far as taking hostage just shows how sadistic he is. Despite the small screen time he has throughout the entirety of the game, he does play a huge role behind the scenes, backstabbing everyone, resurrecting Oda just so he can have more Amrita, and hoping that Oda would actually kill William. But he doesn't take orders from other lower beings, so you might as well take the L there. And it just makes me appreciate how they did the story for the first Neo game, because I actually quite like this villain, even if some of the moments in the game aren't really heavily impactful. I still appreciate him for what he is. And honestly, I'm all up for sadistic bastards who are willing to go out of their way for their own gain. It makes them quite interesting as villains, and makes them play a huge role in the game, because throughout the adventure, you are trying to hunt this guy down to get your guardian spirit, and he's just hoarding it for himself. The only downside I could say about Kelly, just like with Wilfrey, is his boss fights. You fight him twice throughout the game, but both his encounters are quite easy to say. The first fight is only slightly challenging. He did nearly kill me during my first playthrough, but it's still relatively easy. The second fight, however, is really easy. Even as the final boss, you can avoid all of his attacks and probably beat him without taking a single bit of damage. It is kind of a shame that his bouts are really easy, but as long as he does play a good role in the game, I'll let easy boss fights aside. But this is one of the few underrated antagonists I have witnessed, and I'm so happy that I played through this game to experience the rest of it, because I'm hoping that Neo 2 will see if they can impress me with their antagonists. Hopefully. Well, I'm back to talking about this villain again, and for good reasons. Rafe Adler is easily the best antagonist from the Uncharted series, and one of the only ones that's actually good, due to his motivations, his role throughout the entire game, and just how much you would feel for the guy. Compared to the other villains, like for example, Navarro just wanted to sell a biological weapon for money, Lazarevich wanted to find the Tree of Life just to become immortal, and Marlowe wanted an ancient artifact just so she can control fear through her enemies. Those motivations barely left much to me compared to when it came to the other villains in the previous games. But however, Rafe manages to stand out amongst the rest. He's known as a wealthy businessman who is working with Samuel and Nate in order to find Avery's lost treasure. And the deal with Rafe is that since he was a wealthy businessman who was grown up to a rich family, he had everything handed to him on a silver platter. And he grew tired of that. What he wanted to do is to find this treasure so that he can be known for something other than his inheritance and that he's better than Nathan Drake. Even when the two teamed up together during the prison breakout, it really didn't work out well because he grew very impatient with him and decided to try to find Avery's treasure on his own, with the help of Nadine Ross. The big thing with Rafe and what makes me appreciate him is he's not just some psychopath who's just searching for frickin' a bioweapon or want to take over the world. He just wants the glory. He wants to prove that he actually can do something without just being handed to him. The big reveal where Sam lied to Nathan about the prison breakout, considering they had us play the section, made us believe it, was just really a jaw-dropper. Rafe bought Sam out of frickin' prison in hopes that Sam would help him find Avery's treasure, but of course, that didn't work out. And he's one of the actual few villains who is willing to kill Nath, and he nearly succeeded in that goal, unlike with the other villains where they just let the heroes go no matter what. And his final boss fight at the end of the game is just fantastic. One of the best final bosses I've faced thus far. And the thing with the fight is that Rafe goes over all the adventures Nathan had, and he wanted to prove that he is something, and Nathan is nothing by finding this treasure. But in the end, the greedy bastard got what he deserved. Hope it was worth it for you. Overall, Rafe just stands out amongst the rest for being one of the better known and well written villains in the series, and it's just a great way to cap off my second favorite game in the entire series. I say it's definitely worth it. If there is one thing the Ori games manages to do very well, is the villains. During the starts of both games, they showcase why our villains are evil and what they're actually doing, but later on, explains through their backstories why they are evil and why they are doing this. It honestly makes me feel bad for them considering they weren't evil to begin with, but because of what happened, it led them to these horrible choices. To me, Shriek kinda had the worst of the end, and became one of my favorite antagonists I've seen, and it makes me feel bad for her. You get explained about her backstory that she was hatched within the Silent Woods, and seeing her dead parents, she had no choice but to continue on. She tried to sought out the comfort of friends, family, a place that she can call home. But because of her decayed body, it led to her getting rejected and driven away. She had no choice but to return back to the Silent Woods, and these experiences caused her to outlook the world and hate the light for good. Any creature associated with it, including Ori, must die. It's a shame too because it wouldn't have been like this if she wasn't rejected away by everyone else. But because of this, it led her to hating the light and hating everyone else, causing destruction and nearly killing Ori at the start of the game. And even during the Avalanche section, she still will go out of her way to make sure that the light doesn't get restored in this forest. She hates it that much that it became a big harm to her, and even during the final fight, she goes out of her way to try to destroy it. and with no choice but to fight, it led to one final confrontation, and one of the best final bosses I have experienced in this game. It's easily really fun and really epic, and yet quite challenging. Even the music solidifies the whole entire feeling and setup entirely. And even after her defeat, I felt bad for her that she had to go. She had no choice but to lay rest to her dead parents, and thus withered away for good. It's honestly quite depressing to see her go, because I've never felt this way to a villain in any video game, and making me feel bad for an antagonist is just honestly quite impressive from High Moon Studios, how well they've written the story. Even with the first game's villain, it makes me feel bad for the two because they weren't evil to begin with. But because of what led their actions to their motivations, it makes me feel for them. And this is one of the few antagonists that I find to be very underrated and very good, in my opinion. If there is one antagonist that I really liked, and if there's one friend I would really thank and want to give a handshake to for introducing me to this series and getting me invested in it, I would give him a handshake for introducing me to Dr. Nefarious from the Ratchet & Clank franchise. Considering the series has pretty mixed quality in terms of their villains, picking the best one was kinda tricky, but when the Mad Doctor came to present himself, already I was impressed. He does have quite a cool design despite being a robot, and his backstory is also quite interesting. In the Korg Vid comics, it was revealed why Nefarious became a robot because Captain Korg, being the douchebag he is, bullied Nefarious and just continued it throughout 9th grade. And later when he confronted him, he wanted to give him a girl noogie, but it led to Nefarious's untimely demise, only for him to survive and come back as a robot, and suffering with some technical issues here and there. I guess a lesson had to be learned here, but Nefarious didn't just give up on that. Later on in the third game, he plans to wage war on the Solana Galaxy with his army of robots and Tyrannoid forces, and he plans on transforming various populations into robots using these super weapons called the Bio-Obliterator. With these super weapons, it can just easily turn anyone into a robot here and there. He does play a huge role into the game, being quite a funny and intimidating presence, actually doing stuff in the game, like taking away Clank and sending out these Bio-Obliterators to show what exactly power they're capable of. But even at the end of the game, his plan gets thwarted and he gets defeated by Ratchet, Clank, and Quark showing up in the final confrontation, now stranded on an asteroid and drifting away for quite a long time. But Nefarious dwelled on that failure as he landed on the planet Xanathar and participated in Fungoid activities, until one day he learns and hears about the Great Clock, this ancient device, and thus leading us to a crack in time. Easily my most favorite moments are presented here because he's such a big highlight, and his plan for finding the Great Clock and using it as a time machine to go back in time to where the heroes always lose and the villains always win was quite an interesting plot, and it definitely made the game much more impactful. Take a guess where they got the idea of that plot for Rift Apart. But he does succeed in that game, which is one thing I really can applaud him for, even if it's just another dimension and meeting his superior counterpart. But his role in A Crack in Time were easily some of my favorite highlights, where he's just downright hilarious and actually makes sure that Ratchet & Clank can't interfere with his plans. Here are some of my favorite highlights from the Mad Doctor in some of the games.
Oh, am I interrupting?
Lawrence!
I'm rehearsing my epic romantic action comedy space opera. What's the matter, Lawrence? Chicken?
Not the hypersonic brainwave scrambler.
The hypersonic brainwave scrambler! I'm finished killing you. I think I'll rewind time so I can do it again and again and again!
Overall, he just stands out as one of the series' best and being one of the only antagonists that makes an appearance in multiple games. Sure, there's a couple side villains here and there, but Nefarious just does it the best. And if there's one thing he does the absolute best at, is fighting. For such a mad doctor that's a bit of a moron at times, he does put up a really good fight. The fighting up the arsenal is one of the most challenging and fun final bosses I faced, and this fight in the Kraken time is one of the best penultimate bosses I faced. It just goes to show that he's easily the best boss fight in the entire series. As for his other fights, the VidComic fight is really not that bad. His fight in the 2016 game, however, just kinda exists. The reason why I'm not talking about that is because I'm not really a huge fan of his role in that game. He just sides with Chairman Drek and pretends to work for him, or to backstab him and just destroys the planet that Drek was rebuilding, just to wipe out everyone in the galaxy. But thankfully Rift Apart gave us a better take on him in that game, and I'm so looking forward to playing it. Maybe I might change my placement to make him number 2, who knows. But either way, the Mad Doctor deserves some praise, and is easily the biggest highlight. If there is one villain that I really liked for being one of the hateful bastards I have ever seen, Dr. Weil from the Mega Man Zero series easily fits that category, known as one of the most hated characters ever to be seen. And honestly, he is one of those characters that's so hated that I grew to like.
But don't let the quarter guy see this. We all know how he feels about Dr. Weil.
And I hate Dr. Vile!
Anyways, this guy is basically the evil version of Emperor Palpatine, considering the Zero series is basically kind of like Star Wars in a certain way, and just really well done with the story. Weil believes that Reploids should have their own free will to prevent them from going maverick, but considering the idea was rejected, he was responsible for the Elf Wars, creating the Dark Elf and his ultimate weapon Omega, thus the war lasting for so long, causing a mass genocide. He was so hated that he was exiled into space, of all things, along with Omega. But at the end of Zero 2, with the Dark Elf is finally released, Weil now takes the opportunity to come down to Earth and begin his game of chess. And in this game, he plays it by his own rules. Despite making an appearance in the third game, he makes good use of the entire screen time he has in the game, rebuilding Copy X to get access to Neo Arcadia, using Omega to retrieve the Dark Elf, and using that power for his own gain, and just causing all destruction around the world. And even when Zero comes across Copy X and face off against him, Copy X decided to go full syrup mode, only for that to backfire because since Weil rebuilt him, he placed a bomb inside, and when he was gonna go full syrup, it straight up killed him in the process, thus pinning the blame on the Resistance and blaming them for killing Copy X and appointing himself leader as New Arcadia. This guy is one sadistic, evil bastard, and I like it for all the right reasons. What he makes up for with his intelligence is just how he plans ahead on everything. Even when he's sitting behind the scenes, he is making damn sure that everything goes according to plan. Even when Zero defeats Omega, Weil still had a new band and group to side with him, and a space station called Ragnarok to use as his weapon of destruction. If no one is going to side with him, they all should die. And considering just how evil this guy is, he is willing to go out of his way to make sure that everyone follows his rules, his terms, and everything he wants. He is basically the series equivalent of the devil. He says it himself. And when Kraft took control of Ragnarok and fired the space station at where Weil is at, the bastard is still alive! Yeah, because he has plot armor by his side, and thus leading us to the final confrontation where he fuses himself with the space station in one last desperate attempt to kill Zero. In the end, he has failed, but succeeded at the same time. Zero sacrificed his life to stop the mad tyrant for good, putting an end to the Emperor himself, and thus leading to a fantastic end to the Zero series. Only for the ZX series to come out and show that the biometals are basically various characters of the Guardians, X, and Zero, and Model W happens to be Dr. Weil. He's still alive. His fragmented pieces and his soul still remains inside that biometal Model W. Hence the name itself. It's just amazing how they managed to create such a hateable character with 4 games and yet only appearing halfway into the frickin' series. It's just really impressive to say the least. And his boss fight is easily one of the best final bosses in the entire series, and one of the best I have faced thus far. It was such a great end to the series, and overall, Weil succeeded his job being one of the most hateable, detestable, vile, evilest characters I have ever seen, and with that strategy and intelligence he had, just made up for it. I'm just hoping that if they ever make a third ZX game, they better not butcher him, or else I will hate you, Capcom, forever! But we all know that's never gonna happen. Out of all the villains I have seen thus far, one managed to stand out amongst the rest, and in the best ways possible. And even with WoW being so close to being my #1 personal favorite, this villain, I think, deserves it even more. And considering the game I played through was such a guilty pleasure, I had the pleasure of witnessing the darkness himself. Methis the Dark. One of the best villains in the entire Sonic series, and easily one of the best ones I have seen. Methis has quite an interesting backstory. He serves as one half of Solaris, being the mind, and Iblis being the power. After the Solaris incident, a massive explosion happened, and thus the two beings, Iblis and Methis, split apart, with Iblis being sealed away inside Princess Elise, and Methis being sealed inside the Scepter of Darkness, only for the Scepter to break, and thus Methis retains a new form through Shadow's shadow. And with this new form, he uses it to manipulate Silver into thinking Sonic is the Iblis trigger, and forces him to go kill Sonic to restore his future, just to see the two fight. But it really didn't work out for Silver on his end. But Methis tried to convince Shadow to turn against humanity because of how they treated him in the previous games, how they saw him entirely. But Shadow refuses. And even though this game doesn't have the best looking graphics wise, Methis definitely stands out in the best ways possible. His zombie walk, his evil demented eyes, and just downright freaky design, especially his second design, is just scary. The crystallized design, no mouth, no eyelids, Everything about him makes him look genuinely terrifying. This is the form that we all know, and love. This form that he shows that he's done with the tricks. He's ready to go out for the kill. And he doesn't spare you out of pity or mercy. He will make sure you die. Even with the way he speaks, it makes it look like that he is lying, but at the same time, it feels like it's the truth. He did tell the truth about certain occasions, but it was all just manipulation on his end. And this just works out pretty well in the game's context and how they presented the story, forcing the heroes to fight each other just for his own entertainment. And in the end, he manages to kill Sonic. No other villain in the entire series has ever done that. And the reason he did that is so Iblis can be released out of Elise and form into the being Solaris, an interdimensional being of time and space to wipe out all existence in the world. It just works out so well because he makes sure that everyone is suffering. He wants to see the whole world burn. And that's really sadistic, and I'm all up for it. Even his boss fights are one of the 2 better fights in the entire game. His first fight is quite fun as you have to charge up Shadow's chaos power in order to get Methis out and attack him. His second fight can be quite tricky as you deal with the shadow monsters and try to gather up enough chaos energy in order to release Methis out from the shadows and attack him that way. And even the music solidifies the whole entire fight and how it projects his feelings. This guy is basically the series equivalent to Satan himself, and no other villain can come close to topping this guy. I'm hoping that Shadow Generations will present us something amazing, especially with how they're handling Black Doom, and seeing my boy Methis back again just makes me excited, even though he's probably just there for a boss fight. But hopefully that opportunity will arise. We will get to see the darkness rise up again. Well, that's it for this list. I overall enjoyed doing this list again, and hopefully I'll get a chance to do more later on. I hope you all enjoyed, and happy Halloween, everybody! See you all next time.